I just think the government priorities are wrong. I mean, you know, the money's spent. They've spent £3 billion on reorganising the health service to completely pointless effect. And the Health and Social Care Act has been nothing but damaging in my view. It's allowed privatisation to creep in through the back door. If you look at a map of how the NHS looks now compared to how it looked 4 years ago, it's just a morass of confusion. In terms of small pot of money, yes, but they're just spending it wrongly. Police and crime commissioners, I mean, our own police and crime commissioner has gone way over budget. I mean, I'm sure he's a very nice person, but we don't really need him. We need more police. So, you know, and nationally, that sum of money that's been spent on PCCs is just in the millions and millions and millions. HS2, why are we even going ahead with HS2? Scrap HS2, spend it on services that people actually want. I mean, there's a whole list of things, I'm sure, that you know, tax breaks for big businesses. Why are we doing that? You know, what about our local independent business who are struggling? They need some help. So yes, I do appreciate there's a small pot, but government it's just misguidedly spending money on the wrong things in my view, and I think that needs to be changed. I'm actually quite opposed to closing hospital beds, and the reasons for that are because people, we have huge pressure locally with a growing elderly population, people with more complex health needs, and I don't believe, I mean certainly the argument locally is that it's going to save money to close hospital beds, and that isn't the case. Absolutely, that is not the case. I'm on the Health and Wellbeing Scrutiny Committee at Devon County Council, and we interviewed, or we've had a GP from Torrington at the last meeting, and after asking some questions, it was revealed that the plans to close, actually the decision now to close all the beds at Torrington Hospital is going to be pretty much cost neutral. So I don't see any benefit at all actually in closing community hospital beds, and I think all it will do is actually put more pressure on carers, people living at home, and any system set up to look after people in their own homes is going to offset any cost of closing the beds. So actually no, I don't support that model. That's two issues. The first one is about how under pressure our local NHS is from tourism locally. Was that the question? Whether I would ask for more money to support the NHS when the tourists come down and put pressure on local health services? Absolutely, and I think probably I should also add there is that compared with other areas in the country, Devon's NHS is historically underfunded and quite dramatically underfunded compared with other parts of the country, and that's one of the, actually it's a motion I lodged at County Council a few months ago, and they're looking into that now. I think letters went off to central government. And absolutely, with regard to the donor opt-out, absolutely, and I don't really see why the rules are set up as they are at the moment where people have to opt in. It's much better for a system for people to have to opt out, so yes, of course I would be very happy to ask a question about that. This year there will be considerable bus service cuts. And I think Devon County Council has said something like, well, they won't cut any communities off, but that might mean considerable cuts of numbers of buses during the week, which could have a huge impact on some of the more isolated communities. And that's a massive concern. In terms of, I mean that just comes back again to the swinging budget cuts on public services. If it wasn't for central government and their austerity measures, those cuts would never have to be made. And I think that probably is included in all of the pledges that I make today about public sector cuts and how damaging they are. So yes, I mean I think I would certainly oppose those cuts, and also I think there's a really strong argument for dualling the line between, and including passing loops on the railway line between Exeter and Salisbury. Yeah, sorry, mental block for a second. And I think there needs to be more investment in local rail services, rather than, of course, HS2, which is going to really benefit very few people at all. and cause a lot of damage. I think I would say that I would acknowledge that a lot of people are concerned about the impact of the landscape impact of wind and solar farms, and I can understand that. And I think probably what I would say is that rather than having the speculative planning applications that keep coming in, well, around here, it's solar farms in particular, which can be very unpopular and actually quite visually intrusive. What we need to do is to sit down at the beginning of a local plan and work out where those solar farms or wind farms might be best located to keep them out of the prominent land, so they're not having an impact on their area, that's adding natural beauty, or they're not on top of a hill. And that would then avoid them, hopefully, coming forward speculatively and sporadically. Yes, in fact, it was one of the motions I lodged at Devon County Council recently, and it was supported unanimously. So at the moment, for example, a developer, when putting a planning application in for housing, has to provide some money for education, some money for other services. But bizarrely, the NHS it doesn't have to provide money for local health services. So it just seemed completely bonkers to me. So I lodged a motion at Devon County Council a few weeks ago, and it was actually supported unanimously, if I can remember rightly. There's been quite a lot of motions. So my understanding is that has gone to the Local Government Association for discussion. Supermarket, yes. When I was talking to town centre traders and, in fact, local people, I picked up quite a lot of concern about the possibility of a supermarket being here. I mean, this is a rugby club, this is a sports field, and it should remain a sports field in my view. Also, you know, the more supermarkets there are in any location, and we've all heard what's happening with Tesco. It's actually reducing the size of its stores and opening them up in town centres as opposed to these huge out-of-town or edge-of-town supermarkets. And I would be concerned about the loss of this space, although I know that developers always say they'll provide it somewhere else, and probably East Devon District Council would say yes, they'll go somewhere else. But why lose it in the first place? And also, the impact of a huge edge-of-town supermarket would have on town centre traders, and you know, they're struggling, and they don't need any more hardship. That's my view. I think from talking to them, they've got real concerns because, well, East Devon District Council has dangled them on a string about their plans for a good 2-3 years, and as a result, they're finding it hard because they can't plan. And I think we need to recognise that Exmouth seafront is actually very special, and some of those attractions are unique. And they're heritage attractions like Exmouth Fun Park with the swans. I mean, that's been around for like 40, 50, 60 years. And the idea that that's just going to be bulldozed, when really I'm not quite sure what is going to go in its place, I think that's a real worry, and I think it's a real shame. And I think actually, I think East Devon District Council have behaved quite badly over that and how they've treated those businesses on the seafront. I think it's being addressed, perhaps it isn't, but of course, you know, climate change is to blame for all of those sorts of problems we're having right now. And I think it probably is quite a difficult one to solve, but I mean, certainly when I was 8, those sand dunes were enormous, and now they're just non-existent. So there is a real problem, and it does need to be sorted out. I have to say, I'm not an expert on how to sort it out, so I've not necessarily got the answers for you, but I certainly agree with you that it's a real problem and needs to be addressed. It's a challenge as a district and county council I have all the time. You know, there are always, you know, there's always a view in favour or a view against, and you just have to weigh it up. And you know, I have said in my manifesto that I will be a champion for town centre traders, but equally I'm sure that if there was a proposal to increase, you know, cycling routes and pedestrian areas, then I'm sure that they would also be in favour of that. I think from talking to them, the impression is that anything to help footfall in the town would be a good thing, and you know, I would obviously look at all options. Well, I have to think about the East Devon council seat, don't I? Because that's this election on the same day. With regard to Devon County Council, I don't see, if I was elected to Parliament, I don't see that it would be possible for me to continue being a councillor on Devon County Council as well, and giving it the time and commitment that it deserves. I think you raise a really important point. I think I touched on it in my speech in Exmouth some 7 months ago, and you're absolutely right. Every council locally, in Devon County, East Devon, well, I mean, in Exmouth, I think the town council is Conservative run, and that's a problem. You've got a Conservative MP, a Conservative Police and Crime Commissioner, and certainly in the case of East Devon District, I mean, not in Devon County Council's case, because that has changed hands over the years quite a few times. So, speaking personally, Devon County Council tends to be, in my view, fairly progressive. However, East Devon District Council is a completely different matter. Dinosaur would be the polite word I would describe council. You know, it's been Conservative run forever. And they've, I think, always had a huge Conservative majority, except for one short period. Or a very large Conservative majority. And currently there are, out of 59 councillors, there are 42 Conservatives. So, you know, to try and get things through at full council is quite difficult, because the Conservatives do the block vote, although they say they don't. But they do, actually. I think, absolutely, May the 7th has to be about getting a better balance on East Devon District Council, for sure. That's a really important. It needs to have a bit of a kick up the pants. I didn't mean to say that. And more independent councillors, or more any other councillors really, but independents are great, of course, because they don't have that sort of party line. And I would say that because I'm an independent anyway, and I think it's great to be an independent. But all I can say is any independent, or any people that are thinking of standing as an independent, just go for it, because I've found it really rewarding. Yes, I've had the fights with the Conservatives, and the last one was on Thursday evening, and they continue. However, it's so rewarding. People really appreciate what you do, it's a great thing to do. I have to say, it's the best I've ever had being a councillor. I absolutely love it. So, absolutely, if you're considering it, just do it.